Hi, thank you
Hello.
so much for joining our book club.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I first and foremost want to say, again, thank you for joining us. I have been so looking forward to this chat. I was one of the very first people that got to read the manuscript for Such a Pretty Girl way back when it first came into Kensington, and I've been so stoked to actually get to chat with you about it. I thought it was an incredible book. So
Thank
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I would love, for any readers who maybe haven't gotten the chance to read it or were reading along with us this month,
you.
if you will tell us a little bit about Such a Pretty Girl and about yourself.
Sure. I'll guess I can talk about myself first. I'm Tammy Greenwood, T. Greenwood, and this is my 14th novel, and most of which have been with Kensington. And I'm returning to Kensington after a couple of years away. And so it's super exciting to be home with this book. I live in Southern California in San Diego, and but I spend my summers in Vermont. And as those of you who've read the book know, Vermont plays a role in the story as well. As for the book, it is about a former actress. Her name is Ryan Flanagan, and the story takes place in two different timelines. And in the current timeline, Ryan is an adult. She's in her 50s. She's raising a daughter. She's a single mom raising an 18-year-old daughter in a place called Lost River, Vermont, which is a former summer stock theater sort of commune or place where people used to come and perform in the summertime. But now she just lives there with her daughter. And she gets a bit of news from her best friend from growing up that a photo taken of her as a young preteen has been found in the possession of a sort of a Jeffrey Epstein kind of character, a guy named Zev Brenner, and which is disturbing, to say the least. But more disturbing than just being found in this guy's possession is that there's an inscription on the back that appears to be from her mother. And so this sets her on a journey to figure out exactly how her mother knew this guy, if there was any complicity between what he was doing and her mother. She had never heard of this guy before. He was in the news. He did not play a role in her childhood. Through a series of events, which I won't give away for those of you who haven't read, I don't want to spoil anything, but she winds up going back to New York City to sort of figure out what's going on, as well as to do something else, which I don't want to spoil anything.
Right.
And the story also goes back and forth in time, like I said. So we get glimpses of her childhood. Her mother, Fiona, was an aspiring actress at this playhouse in Vermont, and when Ryan was a little girl, and they get an opportunity to move to New York City for her mother to pursue her dreams, and they go live with friends at a place called West Beth, which is an artist community which actually exists, still exists, and is a vibrant community in the West Village. And we watch the story of her mother's efforts to become an actress, sort of failed efforts to become an actress, and then ultimately what happens is that Ryan herself is discovered on the street by a modeling agent. And Fiona goes from being aspiring actress to very involved stage mother. So there's two timelines, two stories, and the photo at the heart of the story is taken by an artist who lives at this artist community, and his name is Henri. And the story of the photograph is really the heart of that backstory. It was taken on the night of the 1977 blackout. And so as we sort of go through time, it's all leading to the climactic scene of the story in which this photo was taken. So that's it in a nutshell.
Yes. And, I have plenty of questions about this story itself, but one of the first things I would love to kind of pick your brain about is how did you keep everything straight when you were writing the book? Like you said, you've got these two very distinct locations and two very distinct timelines kind of all running alongside each other. So what was your craft process like?
That's a good question. I actually wrote the scene, the opening scene of the book, which is when Ryan hears from her best friend Gilly that there's an article in the Times about this photograph. And so I wrote that, and I didn't know much else. I knew she was living this sort of reclusive life in Vermont with her daughter. And I knew that she had lived in New York. And so I wrote that scene, and then I really just went back in time, and I was like, okay, let's see what happened when she first moved to New York with her mom. And I did write this. I did not write the two timelines separately. I wrote them concurrently, alternating. It's basically every other chapter. They alternate back and forth every other chapter. And I've written many books that use dual or even three timelines, and I've done it both ways. And for me, I've learned that writing them separately and then piecing them together, collaging them together, is really, really hard. It makes the transitions really difficult. So I tend to write the book as it appears, even if it's non-linear and non-chronological. So that was the sort of process. Was, writing one present chapter that has this mystery, and then writing the past chapter, which I knew was going to be sort of a slower burn, and an, unfurling of her history.
Right. I think that makes total sense. My mind is a little bit blown at the idea of trying to write 3 different timelines. Like, I don't think I could do 2 timelines, let alone 3. That would just be pure chaos to my brain. So kudos to you for doing that. I'm also curious, obviously, like you said, one of the things that I do want to talk about a little bit further into our chat is that, the iconic or infamous, whatever word you want to use, New York City blackout is obviously a huge staple point in the timeline and story of this book. So obviously New York City was like always going to be a place and the place where part of this story happened. Was Vermont always going to be the other location? What drew you to Vermont? That's not a location that I would instinctively think, oh yeah, an artist would go here.
Right. Well, I grew up in Vermont, so it's a place that's very near and dear to me. It's also a place where many of my books are set. And so there are some repeat characters. Zuzu is a character who has been in several of my novels. Effie is a character who's been in several of my novels. And so I knew, and also there is a connection between Vermont and New York. There are a lot of New Yorkers who come to Vermont, for vacation, for, sort of to get back to nature, to get back to the land, especially that time period. And I wanted it to be sort of the exact opposite. I just wanted it to be a really stark contrast between the life that she had in the city. And I was actually just talking about this in another interview the other day, the idea that both places have their dangers. New York City, obviously, in the 70s was a very different New York than it is now. It was a city on the decline. It was very crime-ridden, bankrupt. It was a dangerous place to be. But Vermont also has, sort of natural dangers. Your antagonist is the weather, is the animals. There are all these different things, rivers, bodies of water, and Ryan is a character who has anxiety and has since she was a little girl, and so I thought it was really, this wasn't a conscious thing, but it was a really interesting thing to sort of explore how that anxiety manifested in Vermont, in a sort of idyllic, natural place, and then in New York City, which is just overwhelming to a lot of people, and especially to a child. But I did, and I wanted it to be close enough that it was realistic, that somebody could give it a shot. I think, as Fiona says, we're gonna give it a try, and to be able to drive down there and sort of shack up with this family at this artist residence. And if it doesn't work out, she can go home back to Vermont pretty easily. So yeah, that was a decision that I made pretty early on, was to have these 2 dual locations. And the lives that she has lived in those 2 places are very, very much in contrast as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really glad that you mentioned Ryan and her anxiety, because we do have a reader who is curious, and I love this question. Why do you think Ryan was always so afraid, even as an adult, even in Vermont? I think we can all understand why she may have had those fears in New York. You know, it was a very unsettling position that she was being put in as a child. But what do you think, you know, did that lead to those continued fears as an adult? Did they shape themselves differently? You know, where did that come from?
Well, I think I was an anxious kid, and I had no real reason to be. I
Mm-hmm.
think anxiety is something that so many people struggle with and can relate to, and it starts often in childhood. But I think for Ryan, it stems a lot from the fact that her mom is really not safe. Her
Mm-hmm.
mother is not a safe person, and so I think that you know she was very well cared for by the various communities that she lived in. At the Lost River Playhouse, she had the community of actors and actresses, and this woman Serafina, who's the sort of proprietor of the Playhouse, who was very much as sort of a mother figure to her. And then in New York, she has Henri, she has Gilly's family, but the person who's supposed to be the safest is the most dangerous. And I think that anxiety that was evident early on. There's a scene where when they're moving to New York, she's having an anxiety attack, and Gilly sort of holds her tight. They're on a converted school bus headed down to the city. And so it was always there. And then you take a kid who's already prone to anxiety and put them in a place like New York in the 1970s. It's really, really going to highlight that and bring it out and become problematic for her. So yeah, it wasn't a super conscious thing. It was a trait of hers. It was a quality of hers that I knew was part of her character. And then watching how it played out, was sort of interesting, and how she managed it as an adult. It was still like she's always sort of tamping down the anxiety about her parental anxiety about her daughter Sasha, who's 18, and starting to want to flap her wings and fly away, right. And having to deal with the anxiety of what that means, and the dangers that lurk out there for her too.
Yeah, I absolutely I, as someone who is prone to anxiety and grew up with anxiety, I really loved how Ryan's anxiety and fears shift and change over the course of the novel. Like you say, as a child, she has very specific, very, understandable sources of anxiety that really kind of manifest and change once she gets into adulthood in ways that I don't think she is even aware is happening. There were a lot of instances where you kind of have to go, oh, I don't, as the outside perspective is, oh, I don't think you realize why you're doing what you're doing, and that you're doing it to protect yourself. So I really enjoyed that aspect of this character, because it is, we don't often see, especially a character where we go from childhood to adulthood with them. We don't usually see okay, they've had anxiety, they continue to have anxiety. It doesn't just go away. So I really loved that.
Mutates and changes.
Yes, just kind of shifts and moves around. Well, I did want to talk a little bit about the particular bonds of motherhood. Like you said, you have written a number of novels, and quite a few of your novels do deal with the topic of and bonds of mothers and daughters, and the different ways those can appear. We definitely see a very complicated mother and daughter bond with Fiona and Ryan, and then we see how that really shapes and changes Ryan as a mother in turn. So I'd love to just kind of pick your brain a little bit about what was it about this complicated bond between Fiona and Ryan in particular that you really wanted to write? Why was that the story that you chose?
Well, I think it really stemmed from this book in a lot of ways. I grew up in the 70s. And so I grew up with, a lot of those actresses like Brooke Shields and Jodie Foster, and, these actresses whose careers were very edgy and controversial. And their moms were always involved because they were children. They were little girls. I think Brooke Shields was 12 or 13 when she did Pretty Baby, 13 when she did Blue Lagoon, and I remember seeing, interviews and things with her mom, and I really am so fascinated by the line when it comes to ambition, the line between parent and child. And I think it's a universal, you have dads who are like coaching their sons to play, football, or, I'm a ballet mom myself. My daughter's a dancer. And so I've been around a lot of, moms who are raising daughters who are performers. And so I wanted to look not only at like a mother-daughter relationship that was problematic or complex, but one that was really affected deeply by the mother's ambition, and how having a child who gets the dream that you want affects that relationship. So it really, from the get-go, I knew that Fiona was going to be a problematic person, and not the best mom. And Ryan, though her feelings are not black and white, they're, even as an adult, they're not black and white. Even after being somewhat estranged from her mother, she has very complicated feelings, as I think we all do about our families and our parents, and those people who were there in the formative years of our lives. And so that was where it started. And I'm just, I'm fascinated by the stories of moms and daughters. I am a daughter, and I have daughters. And this is in no way autobiographical, but I think that, that bond is so unique. And in a situation like this, where Fiona is Ryan's mom, and there's no dad in the picture at all. There's an intensity to their relationship. They're very, very close, and they're close in age. Ryan's mom was really young when she had her. And so I really just wanted to explore what that meant in an extraordinary circumstance, how things are taken to the extreme in this story, and how that affects the dynamic between these two people.
Yeah, I definitely, I was really struck, like you said, by that dynamic of not just the ambition, but that jealousy that you don't expect to have, the jealous moment of, oh, my daughter is getting my dream. This is what I wanted, and now she gets it. And I found that really, really gripping, because in that moment you almost feel for her. Okay, I see
almost.
why. Yeah, almost. Not quite, because the way we got there wasn't great, but you can almost empathize in that moment of feeling that heartbreak of, I didn't get to have my dream, but someone else gets to live it for me. And it is a very complicated emotion. And especially when you layer in that mother-daughter situation, it is all so complicated. So I really was impressed by how it all unfolds.
Well, I think it's really interesting when I'm teaching creative writing, and teaching novel writing in particular. One of the major things that we talk about very early on is that characters don't necessarily need to be likable, but they do need to be relatable. Even the bad ones, even the difficult characters need to be relatable. And the key to that is always in giving that character something that they long for, something that they want deeply and profoundly. And if you can, because that's a universal quality, we all know what it feels like to want something and to want it badly, not be able to get it. So even though Fiona and her actions and behavior is nothing that most of us would ever even ponder, we can still understand her. I can still understand her, and she's narcissistic, and she's selfish, and she's a lot of things, but she also has a deep, honest, and raw yearning, and she works really hard for this thing that is just not going to happen for her. And I think that's heartbreaking, and most people are not jealous of their own children. Most people aren't. But a narcissist is, and a woman like Fiona is. She's just young enough and immature enough to vocalize that jealousy. It's not, just let it feel it and then let it pass. She vocalizes it. She tells Ryan, she says nasty things. She says snide things. She behaves like a child herself. And, I think this is the other thing about their relationship is that very early on, it's clear that a mother is supposed to protect her child, but Ryan has always felt like the one who protects her mom. Things are very blocked in this relationship, as I think, happens in dysfunctional, maternal relationships, is things get flip-flopped.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think there are probably many readers out there who can sympathize with the feeling of mothering their own mother, or feeling like they are having to be the parent or the adult in a situation where they don't necessarily, they shouldn't necessarily be the adult. So I definitely think that that's something that a lot of people can understand. And like you said, it's very interesting when you look at the perspective, like you said, everyone wants something, but the difference is whether or not you hurt other people in that process of trying to get it.
Exactly.
So yeah, I love that deeper insight, because like I said, it's very easy to hate these characters. It's very easy to say, this is a bad person, and she is a bad person, but there is some element of empathy and sympathy for her, because deep down she maybe didn't, like, she doesn't think she's a bad person, is where it comes down to, which is always, that's like my favorite type of complicated character, is someone who is doing truly bad things but has no idea they're doing bad things. They don't see it that way. I love that, and that complicated nature.
She thinks that she has a very skewed reality, but I think she does genuinely think, Ryan is safe in terms of there being other people around that are constantly caring for her. She's very loved by the people around her, and then her mother sort of fits the narrative, or massages the narrative around that, and which is a little difficult, because it's, it's sort of gaslighting a little bit at certain times in the novel, when Ryan really needs to be confrontational and to be told that you're wrong, especially as a child, like, this is not the way things are, is really heartbreaking, and it's a heartbreaking relationship, I think, that's at the heart of the story.
Absolutely. Okay, I do want to jump over, because we had a reader leave a comment that I'm going to twist into a question. But going back to Ryan's fears and anxieties, this reader had a great point that we're not going to totally spoil anything, but the boiler room scene must have been very intense for Ryan's anxieties and fears for a number of reasons. So it makes me curious, were there any scenes that once you wrote them, it kind of took you aback a little bit, or made you feel a little moment of anxiety just having written that scene?
I think all of the scenes where she was really struggling with fear, I felt, but especially that scene, because by the time I wrote that scene, I knew where things were headed. And, when you're writing, I think for people who don't write, it's very easy to be like, okay, so did this happen to you? Did you ever, A, B, C, or D? And what I always say is like that everything is autobiographical, in that you are conjuring emotions that you have felt at a certain time in a certain circumstance, and then ascribing them to your character as they go through whatever particular experiences they are having, which may be nothing like any experience I've ever had, but the emotional truth of that moment is there. And I very much felt scared and anxious and worried about her. And I think, that's your job as a writer, is to really inhabit, like an actress would, is to inhabit the character that you're depicting on the page.
Yeah, absolutely. I've often said to many of our visiting writers that I could not do what you guys do, because I would freak myself out a little too much trying to. I empathize a little too strongly, so I think it would become a struggle, especially with a book like this. All right, so I have a couple more questions lined up, but I did want to jump over to, as readers in our book club know, I'm a huge history nerd. I'm a huge history buff. It's one of my favorite things to do is talk with writers who incorporate real history into their books about why they did it. So I would love to know, did you already know about the New York City blackout before you started writing the book? Did you, or was that just something that you learned when you realized, oh, I want to set it here, I want to set it during this time?
Mm-hmm. I knew that I wanted Ryan to be a certain age. And so I was like, okay, so I wanted her to be born in 1966 because I was thinking I wanted it to be pretty contemporary with things like The Taxi Driver coming out. I wanted there to be contemporary actresses who were sort of in these films that, anybody who's familiar with like 1970s film history would, be familiar with. And so I knew I wanted it to be set in 1976 or to begin in 1976, the past story. And then as I was, diving into that time and really learning the particulars, I knew that the blackout was somewhere around there, but I actually did not know that the blackout was going to play such an integral role in the plot until I got there, and but there were all these other sort of serendipitous, like, I don't know, Eva, what you call it. It's like when you're researching and then all of a sudden the history starts to feed the fiction. The Son of Sam was murdering people in 1976, 1977. And of course, Fiona fits the description perfectly of one of his victims, and so I was like, and for an anxious kid whose mother often disappears, of course, like the Son of Sam would become larger than life, terrifying for her. Every time her mom was gone, she was convinced that she'd been, murdered by Son of Sam. And but the blackout,
which is exactly what I would be as a kid.
Oh, totally.
That would be 100% me.
And I always joke, like, I think the reason why I'm a writer is because I'm really good at going to the worst case scenario. Like always, I can always figure out exactly what the worst case scenario is in life and in fiction. And so the blackout, I learned, was in the middle of the summer of 1977. And once I knew that, and then I was like, oh my God, that's the night the photo was taken. Like, for the longest time, the book was called Untitled 1977. The photo was called Untitled 1977. And then I was like, wait a minute, what if it was taken the night of the blackout? And then once I had that truth and that, that like plot point, then I was like, oh my God, this is perfect. And all these things that I had planted as seeds, like the games of Manhunt that the kids play at West Bath, just the heat of the summer and like all these different things that I had thought about and, written into it, all built to that very organically. And that's the magic of writing. I mean, that's when things are truly magical, is when, especially when you're writing anything that's historical at all, is when things just coalesce and come together in this beautiful, unexpected way. And that's exactly what happened with this story, for sure. I did not know. So the answer is no, I did not know that it was going to play such a big role.
Was there anything, like, during your research into like the historical aspects of things or into that, flashback timeline, was there anything you uncovered or learned that you just thought, I never knew this, I didn't know this was a thing, or just totally shocked you? I love unusual or unconventional history, so I'm always curious.
Yeah. Two things. Okay. So the first is that, and this is referenced, it's a little Easter egg in the book. So actually, I think it's in a present day section when Ryan is talking about the Jane Hotel, which is in the West Village as well. It's very close to West Bath. And there used to be a theater in the basement of the Jane Hotel. And she references going to see a play there that had a friend of Gilly's sisters who also lived at West Bath, a little boy who lived at West Bath who was in this play. But that little boy is Vin Diesel, who actually grew up in West Bath. And he was in a play about the Natural History Museum when he was a little boy, and living in Westbeth. So there's that. And then there's a really big scene in the Russian tea room. And when I was doing research about the Russian tea room, I learned that Madonna had a job as a coat check girl there when she was, an aspiring. I think she was dancing then. I think she danced with Alvin Ailey for a little bit. But she was a coat check girl at the Russian tea room. So that was, there are all these wonderful little things.
I love that your little history facts are like superstar celebrity history facts. I do love that. That's like a little theme for you.
Yeah, it's fitting for this story.
That is fitting for the story. I do think the Vin Diesel one is probably my favorite. That is like truly just blew my mind a little bit. So I did also just have to.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I did also just have to kind of sit here for a second and go, oh, right. Yeah, no, that would line up with his age. Because in my brain, he's not, that doesn't line up. But it does. It's just, I think he's been the same age in my brain my entire life.
Right. Yeah, he apparently had Bohemian parents who lived at Westbeth. And, he grew up running around the halls of Westbeth. And, that's pretty cool. And actually, there was somebody else that I learned of that. Robert De Niro's dad did live there as well, which is just, it's brought up in the book very briefly, but he did. He was a painter and lived in this artist community as well.
This is going to be a little out there question, but I'm curious because someone did mention in the comment section and it got me thinking about it. Someone did throw out there that, they lived in New York City during the 2019 blackout. I was also there during the 2019 blackout, and worlds apart, worlds different from the 1977 blackout, I would imagine, because it really didn't impact my life that much other than it was very, very hot and very gross because it was the height of summer.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, if you were in the 1977 blackout, what do you think you would have done? How would you have gotten through that blackout? Like, what would you have done to entertain yourself? That I'm always curious, like during these big historical moments, we hear the big stories of, oh, I did this, that, and the other thing. But it's like, having lived through a blackout, it's just really boring for the most part. You're just bored, hot, and tired.
Bored, hot, tired, and hungry with spoiled milk in the fridge.
Yeah, so I'm curious. What would you do if you had been in the 1977 blackout?
Oh my gosh! Well, I would have been a kid, so I don't know. I mean, I think the heat would have been the worst for me. So probably trying to figure out ways to keep cool, and actually, before the blackout happens, she and Gilly are like have a bowl of ice and a fan they're trying to cool themselves off with, and so probably just trying to stay cool. I talked to a woman who did live through the blackout at Westbeth, and she had little boys at the time, and she said they slept out on one of the balconies that's mentioned in the book in their sleeping bags outside on the balcony, and she said it was a pretty uneventful time. They just sort of hunkered down and, pretended they were camping or something. But yeah, we didn't have any significant blackouts in Vermont when I was growing up. I mean, the power would go out, but not like that, not for so long.
Right.
And of course, 2019, everybody would be like looking for places to charge their phones, and, their blocks and things. And, so yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if I know how to answer it.
Yeah, I will say, I'll say during the 2019 one, it's not as like fun and romantic as like the 1977 blackouts where, like you said, like you pretend to camp or you make an adventure. I can say for myself, I got stuck in an elevator. One of my fellow admins got stuck in the subway. Like, it's just not as fun these days. I do like,
and Fiona was, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that my favorite thing, this is another trivia that I learned and incorporated in the book, was that Fiona and her boyfriend were out and happened upon the filming of Superman, and which was actually happening during the blackout of 1977. Right. And they borrowed from one of the nearby buildings, they borrowed a generator so that they can continue filming. That was great.
You got to finish the film on time. It's very important, especially for Superman. I do appreciate a number of the readers in the comment section saying that they would just grab a flashlight and a book. Great answer.
It
That's
is
a
a
good
great
answer for
answer.
readers. All right, so I'm going to move us on to, we have another reader question. Sorry, I got to toggle between all of my windows here. All right, so this reader is curious, what do you do when you get stuck in a rut when you're writing? You know, how do you get yourself out of, you know, a writer's block situation, or when you just can't see how to get the story forward? What do you do?
So I think there are two different ruts. There's the one when you're in the middle of a trip, you know, like there's the flat tire when you're in the middle of writing something. And then there's the one when you're just trying to come up with new ideas. When I'm stuck in the middle of a project, it's usually, you know, in the first draft phase when I'm just trying to discover where the story is going. And the only way, what is it? The only way over is through, or the only way there is through. And
Right.
so when I'm writing, I usually have word count quotas that I give myself. And usually by just being like, I still have to write 1,000 words, even if I don't know where I'm going, will get me through. If I'm stuck because I don't have an idea, or I'm struggling to figure out what to write next, I just play a lot of what if games with myself, and, you know, brainstorming and sort of daydreaming about potential characters and situations and settings. And that's kind of a fun rut to be stuck in. I think it's harder to be stuck in a rut, you know, especially if you're like 150 pages into a book and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I took a wrong turn somewhere.
Right.
I have to go back, or whatever. But yeah, that's can be more scary, I think, than just feeling like, oh, I don't have any good ideas, you know. Oh, that's more like existentially scary. Like, I'm out, I'm tapped. There's nothing left. I have the books that I can write.
Yeah, no,
And
I think the one is definitely a bigger fear for most writers. I think that, like you said, that existential dread of what if there are no more ideas? What do
right,
I
right.
do?
I've done it. I'm done.
Yeah. Uh, but I do think, you know, accidentally writing yourself into a corner would be
Yeah.
very challenging to work your way back out of.
Yeah.
'Cause I don't, you know, again, I'm not a writer for a number of reasons, but yet another big one would be like, I'm so stubborn. If I have written myself into one direction, it's so hard to get me to get rid of it and
Right.
go somewhere else.
Right. Yeah. You have to, it takes a special, you know, training to just be like, I really messed up. I need to go back and get rid of these 100 pages, you know. And
Absolutely.
it's hard. It's hard.
In a similar vein, we have a reader who's wondering, what is your favorite thing to do to relax? You know, writing can be pretty
I don't
stressful,
relax.
even though a lot, I was going to say, do you get to relax?
No, that's not true. I do relax, and my kids are grown now. I have a very recently empty nest. And so we spend our summers in Vermont, and that for me is the time that I'm most sort of feeling like I'm replenishing, rejuvenating myself. We live our summer place is on a pond, and it's very peaceful and beautiful. And I do a lot of reading when I'm there, which is something that I don't do as much during the year because I'm a teacher, and so I'm constantly reading student work, and I don't have a lot of time for pleasure reading. So, like, ideally, just a really good book on the porch looking out at the water. That's like the most relaxing thing to me.
So I'd say, as soon as you said like nice pond, I was like, oh, that sounds so lovely. I want to come visit immediately. Um, well, that does make me wonder, you know, it's one of the questions we like to ask, you know, do you read when you're writing, or do you try not to read other people's work while you're in the middle of your own?
I do read when I'm writing, but I don't read things that are similar to what I'm writing.
Okay.
So I'll read things that are very different, subject matter wise, setting wise. But I'm always reading. So yeah, I think it, I know people who cannot read when they're working, but I think, you know, art is a conversation, and I'm learning things from every writer. And so somebody might be tackling something in their book that has nothing to do with my book, but the technique that they've used will all of a sudden open something up for me that I'm writing, be like, oh, I could do this with my own story and it will fix this problem or whatever. And so, yeah, it's a conversation, I think, often. And so, yeah, I definitely am always reading. Not as much as I would love to be, but I'm always, I don't set books aside when I'm writing, because I'm always writing too. Like I would never read because I'm always writing. So, yeah.
I do think we would all love to be reading all the time if we could. I know I would love that. A lot of people seem to think, like, oh, you work in publishing, all you do is read. No, I don't get to read nearly as much as I would like to, let me tell you. I know you said that you try to read things that aren't similar to what you're writing, but do you have a certain genre that you like to read, or that you go to, to relax? What is that genre that you're like, I know I'm always going to find a book that I like to read in this genre?
Oh, that's a good question. I think literary fiction, and that can be a very broad sort of umbrella. I have certain authors that, I always can rely on to be an escape. I just picked up John Irving's, he says it's going to be his last big book, and it's like 900 pages. And I literally opened it today like, oh my gosh, this is such a commitment. I'm super excited, but like, wow, 900 pages, that's a lot. But I also know that it's going to be an immersive experience, that I can just sort of disappear into. But I read a lot of debut writers. I love like reading what, people's first books. That's so exciting, especially as somebody who has so many books now, like I'm always like, ooh, I'm going to find somebody who I'm going to follow their career, and that's super fun. And then there are the authors who like only have a book out every like 5 years, who you just wait and wait and wait until
you're just like eager and okay, they're almost here. It's almost time. Yeah,
totally. John Irving was one, and Toni Morrison was the same. It was like every 4 years or so, when she was alive. I actually saved a couple of Toni Morrison books because I knew, she was getting older and wouldn't be with us forever. And so I have a couple of books of hers that I still haven't read, just because I was like hoarding them so that I would have them after she was gone.
My brain is still a little bit stuck on the idea of trying to read a book that's 900 pages. I just, I used to whip through books that are like 500, 700 pages, no problem. And now I see a book that's like more than 250 and I hesitate. I'm like, well, maybe we'll see. But I also think that's like a genre thing too, in the genre I like to read, if it's more than 250 pages, I'm going to struggle. But that's okay. Everyone has their preferences. But I do commend you for picking up a book that is that big. I couldn't be me. I don't have the patience anymore.
Yeah.
So we do have a reader who's curious, and I love this question. I haven't thought to ask this with our recent authors. Obviously the pandemic affected everyone at every level, kind of across the board in every way. How did it affect you and your motivation to write? Did you find that you wrote more? Did you write less? How did that, affect you? Because I would think, given the timeline of how your writing process works, that you were probably working on this book during the pandemic, if I'm correct on my timeline.
I started it in the summer of 2020.
Right.
So, I had completed another book, which is actually going to come out next. So it's going to come out, even though I wrote it before, it's coming out next.
I cannot wait for that one. Let me tell you.
It'll be exciting. But this one I wrote in the summer. We were in Vermont, and it was a story I had been thinking about for quite a while, as they usually are. I'll think about something for like a year before I actually write it. And it was really cool because it was such an escape. We were in Vermont, but we were still quarantined. We weren't, I mean, it was 2020, it was just crazy. And we had like this wild cross country road trip, where people still didn't know how you were could get it. So like we were sleeping on sleeping bags in the hotel, like on top of, you know, like crazy things that I think about now. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know, there was no vaccine, no anything. And we got to Vermont, and I really just dove into this story, and I wrote the first draft rather quickly. And I think it was partly because it was just such a nice escape from our current situation. And you know, I think there were a couple of ways to tackle writing during the pandemic. One was to just sort of dig in and write about the experience as it was happening. And then there was like historical fiction, you know, where you could just be like, okay, I'm going to a time long, long before the pandemic. And that was sort of what I did with this story. And the current time frame of the story is set in 2019. So we didn't touch COVID at all with this.
Right.
But yeah.
Yeah, I was blown away by how writers in particular were able to keep pushing through during the pandemic. Because again, it was one of those things that just, it locked everybody, especially creative types. I think, you know, as a creative personality, like it definitely, it was a totally different time. It's one of those blips in time that I think everyone will be thinking about for a long time.
Right.
So I'm very impressed that you were able to get this entire book written during all of that as that was happening. That's quite impressive. All right, so I have 2-ish questions left. We'll see if I make it 3, but we've got at least 2 questions that I do want to ask. There are 2 questions that I love to ask all of our authors, especially at the end of chats when I've gotten everyone nice and relaxed, and then they can hate me for asking the hard questions last. If you could spend a day with a single character from your book, who would you want to spend a day with? And would you want to bring them into your world, or would you want to step into their world?
That's a good question.
It's a hard one.
I think it's a toss-up. I think either Henri or Gilly, and I would want to go back.
I was hoping you would say Henri, because that's who I want to spend a day with.
I probably, and yeah, like I think I'd like to. Yeah, I think Henri, and I would go back. I would go back in time.
Yeah,
hang out with him.
I agree. I think that would be an incredible experience. Just
it would
100%. All right, I'm going to slip one more reader question in between my questions, because I really like this question. If there is one, what is the most exotic locale or location you would like to include in a future story?
Oh my goodness. That's a good question. Well, New York in the 70s was exotic to me.
I was about to say, that is
pretty exotic to me.
Yeah,
and I've never lived in New York.
New York is way out there.
Yeah, I've never lived in New York. And so for me, writing stories, I mean, I've spent a lot of time there, but writing stories and that are set there feels a little bit like traveling, you know, but I don't know. I mean, the problem is that I only write about places that I mean, that's not completely true, but I usually write about places that I know well, because I think it's hard. And so if I picked a place, I would have to like go live there for a while. So maybe like Italy or Ireland.
So pick somewhere that you really want to go visit.
I know. I was thinking maybe Italy, maybe some, you know, villa in Italy would be nice.
You know, if you need a buddy to come with you, I will come. I will sacrifice time to come stay in a villa in Italy with you.
I've been watching White Lotus, which is set in Sicily this season. I was like, oh yeah.
Doesn't it just make you want to go so badly?
It does. It really does.
Like, I don't want to live that life, but I want to go there.
Exactly.
It's like a very clear distinction. All right, so I'm going to ask somewhat of a hard question now. Because you have written so many books, you've, you know, been writing for quite a while. We have a number of people in our book club who are interested in publishing, interested in getting into the writing space. If you could give yourself one piece of advice, you know, the you from 14 books ago when you were first starting, one thing, what would you want to tell yourself? And it can be writing specific, or it can just be one thing about life that you wish someone had told you 14 books ago.
Okay. I think, and I've said this before, so I'm not saying this for the first time, but I think that you have to make the decision that you're a writer and that you are going to live a writing life. Because I think I teach a lot of students, and I struggle with the students who are like, I'm going to write this book. It's going to be amazing. It's going to make me a lot of money. And then I'm going to be done, you know, and that almost never happens.
Right.
You know, I mean, if you're counting on it as like a lottery ticket, you'd be better off with the Powerball. So, you know, but I think that you have to look at it as a lifestyle and as a life's work, and that you are creating a body of work. And it also takes the pressure off. You know, I feel like if you feel like you have to write the perfect novel, and, you know, and it has to encompass everything that you want to say, and, you know, all of the things that you want to teach and share, you will be completely paralyzed. So, and that's probably why I've written so many books, is because I have a lot of things I want to say, a lot of places I want to share with my readers, a lot of characters I want to share with my readers. And I see each one of them as like this little part of my body of work. And the body of work is what will be left behind. That will be my legacy. It's not just one book. So take the pressure off. See every project that you're doing as part of something much bigger and more important. And I think if somebody had told me that, you know, when I was in my 20s, I would have been a lot less anxious about about everything. You know, that a writer's career is ideally a long one and a prolific one. You know, one where you don't just have, you know, sort of like bands that, you know, that you love that have 20 records, and, you know, there's the one-hit wonders, of course, who, you know, everybody can sing every lyric and of their song and it's still catchy or whatever, but there's something to be said for like the Rolling Stones, you know, they're for these people who just spent their entire lives dedicated to making their art, whatever that is, whether it's music or painting or literature. And so I think that's my piece of advice.
I love that. I think that's a great piece of advice. So thank you for sharing that with us. And we did have a reader wondering, I would also love to ask this. You may not be allowed to yet. Are you allowed to tell us anything about your next book? And if not, can you just give us an idea of when it will be coming out?
Yes. I don't know if I think I'm allowed to. I mean, I've talked about it before.
I think you are.
I think I'm allowed to. I mean, it's happening.
As I say, if not, your editor can yell at me. It's fine.
Yeah, we'll send Wendy to you. It's called The Still Point, and it is set in the world of pre-professional ballet dancers, but is told mostly by the moms of these young women. And it's set in Southern California, which is something that I haven't done before. And it's the pub date just got changed to March 2024. So we've got a little while to wait, but I'll be working on getting it perfect before then.
We've got a little while, but it's going to be so worth the wait. I heard the pitch for this book and immediately I was emailing your editor, like, I want this manuscript as soon as I can get it. As a former dancer, I'm so stoked. I can't wait to read this one.
Oh, that's awesome.
Very, very much looking forward to your next book. I absolutely loved your most recent book. So thank you. And thank you for coming and hanging out with our book club for the evening. This was such a fun conversation.
Yeah, well, and thank you all for reading the book and talking about it and sharing with your friends and all that. I appreciate it.
Yes, readers, thank you so much for joining us. Stay tuned. Later this week, we will be announcing our book club pick for next month. I'm very much looking forward to that. And of course, I hope everyone has a very happy, safe, and wonderful Thanksgiving. If you celebrate, if you're traveling, be safe on the road. And I hope to talk with everyone soon. So everyone have a great rest of your evening and a great week.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Happy Thanksgiving. Bye.